Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Hummel Insurance Group for sponsoring today's show. Hummel Insurance Group now owns and operates 7 different offices located throughout the tri-state area. For over 50 years now, the Hummel Insurance Group has been assisting customers with insurance needs and questions. For all your insurance needs, contact Hummel Insurance Group at 812-537-1785.
Welcome to Rock Solid Radio. I'm Linda Hutchinson, the Executive Director of Rock Solid Families, and I'm here with my man, Merrill Hutchinson. Hi, honey.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I have a question for you.
I'm not taking questions today.
Then you're in the wrong show.
You know, we start every show with that anymore.
What?
Like,
a question?
I have a question for you, which is a good way to, we're baiting each other. But when he says, I'm just going to say, nope, closed for business.
So seriously, I didn't realize that we did that, but maybe you guys will have to go back and see if we really do that.
Pretty much.
Lately, you've been doing that to me, so I have one for you. Did you know growing up that you could see yourself as a dad? Did you think you were going to be a dad? Silence.
So the answer to that is actually yes, very much so. But obviously, you're not in diapers going, I'm going to be a dad, But
No.
I do. I had such a great dad experience that I do remember wanting to be a lot like my dad. My dad was fun, engaged, energetic. And I remember, I want to be like my dad.
Yeah.
In terms of being a dad like him.
Yeah. So you had 4 siblings in your house. You were one of 5. So how many kids did you think you were going to have?
I never really gave that a lot of thought until I was getting closer to that time of getting married. And then I just have to be honest, it was all about the selfish way of thinking was really just part of my fabric and not even questioning it. So it was 2 and done. Right? That's 2 and done was kind of the deal. Now I did, after we had 2,
You're the one pushing for 3.
I wanted 3. I was more comfortable with it then, and I wanted to grow our family. It was all because, I don't know. It's just and hun, think of the number of people that we know our age that were 2 and done.
Yeah. Yeah.
2 and done, because it was all about, you've got to be able to control your environment, control your economics, control everything. If you have 3 kids, now you only have 2 parents.
You're
How are you
outnumbered.
going to take care?
Yeah.
Those were the philosophies that were running around that we bought into.
Yeah. So our show today is about kids and those who are waiting for a forever home. And before you change the channel and think, okay, this show is not for us, we actually were questioning, what should we title this show? Because we don't want to turn you off before you ever engage in it. And so this was us. No, we're not even going to entertain that thought. We're not even going to talk about that. That's not an option. At least that was yours philosophy. Mine was, that was something I thought we were going to do before we were even married. I thought we would have a couple biological children and then adopt. And so that is part of our story.
Why do you think that was one of your thoughts from the get-go?
That's a great question. God just laid that on my heart, and I don't know where it came from. I really don't. I mean, I was a young adult. I was going into education, so were you. And so I was already kind of hearing the sad story of our foster care system and kids in the system. And I guess I really felt like I could help that. And so I always just thought that would be something we did.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I shared this story, but when I was a kid, my parents looked into adoption. And we actually had a girl that came from an orphanage at the time, and she spent weekends with us. And it really turned out to be a not very good experience at all. And again, we weren't equipped for it. Even though we had 5 kids in our family, we weren't equipped to know the baggage that she was dealing with. Yeah, and there was a lot of lying, cheating, stealing, some violence. And it was just our whole family was oh, no, this is not for us. And so I think in my mind, I had shut the door
Yeah,
on
it
that.
tainted your image of adoption. So,
Yeah.
the Bible says is very clear that we are all called to care for widows and orphans. This is out of James 1:27, is because we're told in God's word, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. So he boiled down the gospel to the most basic, purest form, and it's caring for those who can't care for themselves and keeping from being polluted by the world. If we would do that, we would have a good chance of success and joy and peace in our lives. And so this is really very foundational to the gospel. And so that's kind of why we're tackling it today. That's one of the many reasons.
Yeah. So it is a good topic. We're going to get into that. Let's thank a couple of our sponsors, and then let's get into our work today. So we, again, want to thank our newest sponsor, Hummel Insurance Group, for coming alongside of us. We want to thank those guys for supporting our mission here. Also, we want to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions for the work that they do for supporting our programming and just supporting our ministry in general. So we want to thank those guys.
Yeah, and don't forget, we're still in the month of November, so we still have our fitness special going on. Man, the time has changed. It's getting dark earlier, and so the opportunity to working out is kind of going by the wayside after work. So come join us Tuesdays and Thursday nights at 7, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 with me.
I need all the accountability partners I can get.
Yes.
So come on out and join us.
We were just talking about the scale, weren't we?
Yeah, it's time for a new scale in our house. Every few months our scale lies.
I'm not sure what's going on.
So
anyway, why this show, hon? Why this show today on
well, the first thing that is really most revealing is that if you didn't know it, this November is National Adoption Month.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's lots of different things that are celebrated in various months, but this is kind of the time where nationally we put a spotlight on the adoption process, the whole idea of it. And so that's a big reason why we jumped on doing this show here at this time.
Yeah. And plus, adoption is part of our story. If you've been listening to Rock Solid Radio at all, you know that. And if not, this is your first encounter with us. Welcome. We're glad that you're here. But adoption is part of our story. And we have 2 biological sons who are both married and out of our house. And then 3 more children who were adopted. And they're our children now, but they were siblings from the foster care world. So we're just here to raise awareness and hopefully help some children find a forever home, So we asked some friends, by the way, hon, to join us in our conversation, and we couldn't have them all around the table. And it's crazy how we're attracted to couples and families who that's part of their story too. It's really crazy. I did not know a lot of people growing up who had adoption as part of their story. Did you? Did you have a lot of people in your circle?
No, not at all.
I didn't. And so it's crazy how as we grow closer to the Lord and to other families, we really hear that this is part of their story. So one of our friends, hon, reminded us of why they chose adoption. She said she was really moved by Ephesians 1, verse 4 and 5. And it says, even before he made the world, God loved us, and he chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us into himself through Christ Jesus. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Think about that for a second.
Well, honey, it's worth thinking about because a lot of people say, well, we're God's children, but we are all his creation. But through a relationship with Jesus Christ, we go through a process of adoption again. So that being reborn again, that second home.
Yeah.
And so, yes, all people are a creation of God, but not all people are adopted into Jesus Christ under that family. And because that is a whole different level of, no, my heart has to seek that. And so, as we've talked about before, hon, adoption is so difficult at times based off of where people's hearts are. Because not all people want to be adopted into the home of Christ because it takes a bonding of the heart. That's part of our story, right? Like there has to be a surrender to that. And that's part of the challenge of adoption because there's no guarantees that there's going to be that giving of the heart.
Yeah.
Right. Depending on the situation, the background, all those things. And so that's why it is a process that we can relate to. And thankfully, it was even offered to us through Christ, and now we see the value in offering it out to others that we could maybe help.
And for some people and stories and friends of ours, their story was infertility. That's what drew them to this decision to adopt. Years and years of infertility treatments and praying for a baby of their own. That was unsuccessful. And some of them even said, like, God was laughing, like, hey, I got a different plan. So when you decide to surrender, I'm going to show you what that looks like. So for many, that was a choice they made because they couldn't have children of their own. But we know some who have biological children who then adopted into their family. One of them shared with me, she said, there's always been a part of me that knew one day I'd complete our family through adoption. She says, when her husband and her were dating and engaged, we would talk about it several times as a regular topic. And if it wasn't even if, it was a matter of when. I can still remember many nights losing sleep just thinking about the millions of kids around the world without a family to call their own. It broke my heart, and it still breaks my heart now. That should not be any child's reality.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So other people, though, have, like Krista shared with us a little bit, the idea that they were all gung-ho on a bigger family. But through medical issues, they actually had a couple biological children, but the medical issues continue to get worse and be a bigger challenge. And so they're like, it's not like there aren't other kids out there.
Right.
At the time, they were doing mission trips and stuff to Haiti and stuff. And it's like, there are people here in need that we could help.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's your story as medical purpose.
And, as you mentioned, Krista, she said, I really didn't know if I could love someone else's child. And she said, it took a mission trip to Haiti and cuddling and rocking a child in her arms, singing lullabies. She knew that she could take care and love someone that she did not give birth to. And that began their adoption journey. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have a hard time in the show.
Well, we're going to pull you through. So that whole idea of, you can see Linda's heart in this, and that whole idea of us thinking and believing that somebody else's heart is worth grabbing, is worth holding. And I think that that's why this is such a big deal. Remember, Hun, you talked about the idea that if you boil down the gospel, it comes down to the heart of the issue. And at the end of the day, what is our heart for other people? And, life can make us very cynical and cold. And we've done many shows where I've, confessed that I can become hardened and cold. But little kids don't have a lot of choice in this matter, right? Like our kids that we adopted, they had no choice in how their parents were behaving. And maybe their parents didn't have any choice, right? All of a sudden we see this long bout of living, and people just survive and they become hardened and stuff. And these little kids, that's not where they want to be. Yeah. And so that's why this is an emotional issue.
Whew. Okay. So I wasn't expecting that. So let's go on to the different kinds of adoptions, because we want this to be a practical show as well. And for us, our story was the foster to adopt route domestically. And so we didn't have a lot of money. That wasn't really like, we couldn't spend $50,000 going overseas. Like for us, it was like, how could we do this? And so we got this story we tell a lot, but I really thought this was part of our story. And you were like, if God wants us to have more children, he'll put them in front of us. Right. And he did, right in your school building as a school counselor, 3 siblings that needed a forever home.
Yeah. So, a lot of times we talk about mission fields outside of our country, going to Haiti, going to Africa, and that's great, especially if that's where you're led. Wonderful. But working in the schools, we see a mission field right here, right? And so
in our own community,
we would see kids that are in difficult family situations. And even though my heart was not as open to Linda's as for this adoption, I would say, listen, I see thousands of kids, in my journey, in my career, and I've seen very difficult situations. God will use that if it's meant to be.
And it was.
And it was. And so kind of like Linda was tearing up before, when I heard the situation of the 3 kids that we adopted, all of a sudden it was like no logical thinking had to come in. It was like all of a sudden my heart got grabbed, and I remember coming home going, we need to talk. And that was not of me. Like prior to that, I never prompted the adoption conversation. That was always prompted by Linda. But it wasn't it interesting now how God grabbed my heart when I saw that these kids, what they were going through and going to continue to go through. And it was like, do I turn my head the other way and just keep driving, so to speak, or do I actually look at what's going on here? And to be real honest, like I felt like it was a time of testing of me. Like I'm not sure that I could have lived with myself with this right in front of my face and turning and walking away.
But for our situation, it was part of our journey, and we felt the call to step up. And it wasn't in our timing. We were empty nesters by then.
I was
we thought
ready
we were
to
done.
retire. I was dreaming of the
we were
boat.
thinking home free. And so, again, God's timing is not always our timing. And a lot of our friends have done other routes. Some of them have done private adoptions. They've gone and spent a lot of money and waited a long time for a baby. They wanted a baby, and that's sometimes a longer waiting period. And then we have other friends who have done the international route.
And so the international I think that's something that has really grown in the last 15 or 20 years in our country. And again, it's not good, bad, or indifferent. It's just like, hey, if that's where your heart is led, then that's incredible. But that's a whole different, another level of things you have to learn. And so it is important that if you're interested in that you start to do the homework to understand everything from the laws in that particular area to the type of kids and the situations they're in.
Yeah, we have a nephew who was adopted through Mexico and, years ago, and now he's an adult and thriving. And so, one of our friends said, we were called to international adoption, and after doing a lot of research, right? And we wanted to help orphans in China. I knew that was part of our story. The orphan crisis in China is just that, a crisis. And it says, the need is just so great. We wanted to help, even if it's just meant one less orphan. And so, that's the point is, you can't take care of them all, but can you take care and love one child? That may be what God's calling you to do.
Yeah, for sure. So those are some basic types of adoption. There's others too. Within family members, we see grandparents adopting their grandkids for varieties of reasons. So, if you're just curious, and you want to look into it, just glean some information, whether it's through child care services, Division of Child and Family, those kinds of things. I know, like when we work with our pregnancy care centers, sometimes we get ladies who are have an unplanned pregnancy, and adoption is something that we really want to promote as an option to those kids. And so
give somebody else a chance to love a child.
And so those are all these different types of things that, if one of those pricks your heart, look into it. And it, like you said, hon, it doesn't have to always mean that it takes a ton of money, because in our case it didn't, because our kids came through the Child Services Welfare Department, and the state wants this to work out, because it financially, if you had to look at it from that perspective, it is a burden on the state.
Yeah. And so, there's definitely hoops to jump. I remember it was almost like we saw the family that we wanted, and then we had to do all the hoops. So we had to do the fingerprints, the background checks, the classes,
yeah, we kind of did it in backward order.
I was like, oh, goodness gracious, there's a lot. But it was trying to prepare us for all of the things that we were going to need for that experience. So let's talk about the blessings of adoption and the experiences that we've had and others that we've had. There's so many people, they grew their family, not just with their kids, but now they have grandparents and extended families of all these children they adopted. So that's been cool for some.
I think, hon, part of the biggest blessing that I see, and this is just going to be from our situation here, and everybody would have their own, but the idea that so much of the work that we do at Rock Solid Families, we are always talking about the generation impact, and sometimes people would talk about the generational curse. Like, if you come into a bad family situation and you just get stuck in it and you tend to repeat it and everything. And, I'll say, like, the kids that we adopted, they've at least now been able to be exposed to a different level of health. We've been even been able to work with their father in particular.
Biological parents, yeah.
Yeah, to just like show him, and that hey, your kids can do well.
Yeah, and try to connect. I mean, nobody wins if there's lack of bonding and unhealthy relationships. And so we want healthy for them, right? So if that's with biological parents and family members, great. If it can't happen that way, then maybe that tie has to be severed. But the fact is that so many of these kiddos have experienced such great trauma. And so one of those friends of ours had said that seeing their child overcome the trauma and not be a victim to their circumstances, to see them blossom and bloom. One mom said, that even when they first got their little girl, and this was an international adoption, she wouldn't even let her new parents touch her. She wouldn't let them comfort her. She would sit in a corner of the room and cry. She wouldn't even want to be near them. And she felt hopeless. They felt hopeless. And now today there's a beautiful little girl full of life that hugs them all the time. She laughs and plays. She seeks them out for comfort. Like, that's the picture of the gospel. That's Jesus opening his arms and saying, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And that's what we can offer these kiddos who need to feel that forever home and that love that's unconditional.
Yeah. Some of the blessings are such simple things, but the simple things show the completeness of it. Like when you see your kids starting to just laugh and enjoy life and see value in life, especially when you knew the path they were on before brought very little of that. When you start to see them experience and go down the route of their God-given talents, like to use them, like, wow, it's been really cool for us to watch our kids getting involved in athletics. Just to like, this is something that there's a good chance that would have just not been, it just would have not happened. And so the idea now that they have an excitement for that, and they're like, no, I want to do this, I want to do that. And it's like, wow, like that is just so cool that they're growing that way.
Yeah. Not only are we blessing the children, but we are blessed. One mom said, to look at how far my daughter has come. She was a sweet, fragile newborn, abandoned on a sidewalk, to a life in an orphanage. And by the way, she had some physical deformities, which is one of the reasons why she was rejected in China, to now that she's in her forever home with a family that she's thriving with. It loses her breath in awe of how good God is.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Let's talk, because I think part of the benefit of the training that we went through was most people jump into the adoption process with what we'll call rose-colored glasses on, because your heart's way out there in front of you, and you just and you want to do something great and awesome, and you want to help a kid, and that's definitely, if Linda had not had that initially, there's no way that I would have ever gone into it. Okay, so you do have to have some of that. But part of our training was some exposure to, hey, it's not all roses.
Yeah. What was the movie that we watched that we were like, oh my gosh. Instant Family.
Yeah.
You need to see that movie. And we actually saw it.
Or maybe not.
Yeah. We actually saw it in a theater alone. And people were like laughing, like, this is such a funny comedy. And it was like, that's our reality. Like, that's our story. And it had highs and it had lows. And so there is a lot of baggage, a lot of trauma.
Yeah, so the baggage and the trauma is real, okay? But hon, let's talk just for a second about what surprised you that was hard. What in our actual adoption, what did you go, I didn't quite think it would be like this?
Yeah. So our kiddos were 11, 10, and 7 when they came into our home. And so they had already formed some bad habits, but also some real unhealthy relationship dynamics. And so the bonding took longer than I thought. And that was because that they were older. And so they had kind of already experienced some things in the world and kind of had their own understanding of who they should trust and why. And so that bonding took a lot longer than I thought. And I was saddened by that, because we wanted to love them and we wanted them to feel like this was their home and this was their family. But, because they were older, that took some longer than we thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about you?
I think the thing that shocked me was how long it took to feel a bonding. Like, now this is our family. For the longest time, this was our adopted family. Like I'd always have to have the idea of adopted, and I think in my mind, I don't know why, but I just kept thinking like 6 months. It'll take about 6 months for everybody to kind of get used to each other and get bonded, get into our routines, and we'll be good. And that just wasn't the case. I mean, and I had heard here more recently that it takes 3 to 5 years. And I would say for us, it took every bit of that. It took every bit, because your first 3 years, you're just, I don't know about a baby because we've never adopted a baby, but when you have kids that have a previous life before they came into your house, you just don't undo that. You don't just snap your fingers and it goes away. So you're constantly like, well, what did you guys used to do in this situation?
Yeah.
Well, what's your memory of this? And, that was, I think at times it was frustrating early on. Like, let's just say, let's get into month 7th, 8th, 9. And I was like, is this ever going to gel?
Yep.
So that was the tough part.
One of the parents said, parenting an older child, which is kind of what we had, was already had emotional issues. That child came with some abandonment issues, some trauma, and so they carry that in. And some people, a lot of families are not equipped to handle that, and it needs professional help. So please do not be afraid to reach out and get help if you have an adopted child that is, a child by adoption, and the trauma that has been created by other adults. There was one, the adopted parent said, that it just makes them so angry that those parents' poor choices have affected their child so much. And, one of our friends has a child that doesn't look like them. And she said, we can kind of forget about it, and that's just our daughter, but it's always in her face.
Yeah.
So it's obvious when you're out that people know you're not biologically their child. And so that might be something that you don't see color, but that child knows that there's a color difference. And it's hard. It's hard when they don't see that as being okay.
Yeah. A couple challenges that some of our parents, and we can relate to as well, was just the uncertainty of everything from like, who is the kid going to be? I often think also like the uncertainty of what the child is going to be, because you don't understand all their genetics.
Yeah.
Right? Like we've joked before, with biological kids, when your kid misbehaves, you can go, oh, that's from your side of the family.
That's
right?
grandpa.
But when you have adopted kids, you have uncertainty. Like, where does this come from? Like, how do they, where do they get a thought like that? How does that come to be? So that's an uncertainty is definitely throws a curveball at us.
Yeah.
But also just like the preparedness.
Yeah.
Like, even though we went through all of the training classes, some of our other parents have talked about like, you're just never fully prepared.
No. Well, and sometimes they got a phone call in the middle of the night, or maybe a week notice that they're about ready to have a baby for the first time in their home, or the uncertainty of bringing a child in through foster care with the idea that maybe they may be in forever with you, but then maybe not. Maybe mom gets her act together, and the system always wants to reunite the family. That's the goal. And so that uncertainty, like, can I love them? Are they going to be mine forever? Are they going to have to go back? It's very hard. Even a friend of ours adopted a baby, and that mom had a couple days or weeks notice or decision to make whether or not she was going to parent or give up for adoption. And so just that in-between waiting period, oh my gosh, it's challenging, very challenging.
So as we start to kind of draw down, some of the folks that we talked with, ourselves included in this mix, some things that we felt like it would be important that you, if you're listening out there and you're like, I have thought about adoption, or maybe I've not thought about it, but maybe I need to think about it, okay? That something about this has been of interest to you. Here are some of the different takeaways that the folks that we've worked with say, here's something you might want to think about.
Yeah, more than one of our friends, when we asked them, hey, what would you want people to hear and know if we did this show? And they said, ask a lot of questions. Talk to people who have adopted. Talk to people who have adopted domestically and internationally and through foster care and family members. Like, ask questions, some even hard questions, even if they sound silly. That there are people out there who would love to share their story. They would love to answer your questions. We're actually going to ask you, if you're listening to the show today and adoption is part of your story, would you do us a favor? Would you share the show on social media and then offer that to talk to people, be willing to have conversations? Because if we don't raise awareness and challenge people, especially the church, because one of our friends literally said, this may be a little bold, she said, but I think more Jesus followers needs to boldly step out in faith to care for orphans. If we don't, if the church doesn't, who is? Who will? And man, it's like, I know some of you didn't want to even listen to this show because you were afraid you'd be challenged to that,
Yeah.
but that's something that God's called us to do, to take care of widows and orphans.
Yeah, I think it's important too, hon. One of our families said, don't feel like you have to go this alone. There are lots of support systems out there. Yeah. Everything from your immediate friends around you, which, by the way, you do want your friends and family to embrace what you're doing, because there's a good chance, like that was a big deal for us. We did not want to go through, first and foremost, if our biological kids were not on board, because that would have been a deal breaker, because we need them to be part of this. But then it was outside of that. We ran it by our families, and that was not an easy swallow for them. Some of them were like, are you sure you know what you're doing? But at the end of the day, they all came around and they embraced us. And they continued to do that. And I think that's been huge. Like now they ask about our adopted kids all the time, and they also expect them to attend everything, just like all the other kids. Yeah.
And again, we may not be using the right language. I know that political correctness has kind of changed how you word these phrases about children by adoption or whatever. We love our kiddos. They're our kids. Great. Okay. And so we've not maybe used the correct terminology that's out there in newness, but we've been corrected on that before.
So, but let's go down that road for just a second. So we ran that by our kids.
Yes, we did.
Our adopted kids. We said, hey, how do you guys want us to refer to them? And they were like, we're your adopted kids. We're great with that. We like to be adopted.
Yeah, I mean, we did. We not that we always call them adopted kids,
right,
but they're not offended by using the word adopted.
They think it's really cool.
They do. It's part of the story.
Yeah, it's part of their story, and it's been a good story.
Yeah.
And so, I think, you have to handle these conversations the way you do in your house, okay, and what works well for your kids.
So as we close, if you feel like this ship has sailed like we thought, we were like...
I tried to think it sailed.
Maybe you feel like you're too old to adopt. This doesn't mean you're off the hook, okay? So maybe adopt an older child. Maybe you think you can't put a baby back in your home. You're too old for that. But there's a lot... That's the greatest need, are the older children who aren't babies and that somebody isn't willing to bring in their home. So maybe God's calling you to adopt a teen and provide for them a stable home, maybe 3, 4, 5 years before they're off on their own.
How about you are too old, or maybe it's not on your heart in terms of you actually being able to take that kid in, but the idea that you support the adoptive process, whether it's through financial means, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through services that you're able to offer, support that. Because listen, everybody wins when adoption is supported.
Yes.
When these kids do not have any kind of system in place, any kind of home base stability, all of us pay for this, all right? And that's why we are called to take care of these kids. So there are plenty of other ways, financially, time, Big Brothers, Big Sisters is an awesome way. So there are lots of other ways.
Become a child advocate. Be a voice for a child who can't be a voice for themselves, or sponsor, through Compassion International or World Vision, sponsor a child overseas and give them some of the basic necessities of life, even if they're not coming into your home. And as we said, share the show. Let's get the awareness out, because again, we've got to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And especially if you're a Christ follower, God's calling us to care for widows and orphans. So how is God calling you to do that today? That's our challenge.
Yeah. And so I will say on that, your prayer doesn't need to be, Lord, I hope all these kids have an adopted family. your prayer should be, Lord, use me in this situation.
How do you want me?
Like where do I need to plug in? Use me, and then He will start to reveal to you. He will give, as we've talked about in other shows, the desire of your heart.
Yeah,
okay,
and that's what happened in your situation, hon. That wasn't something that originally was on your heart, but God softened your heart and opened your eyes to really what He was calling us to do.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. So, hey, hopefully this is a valuable show. As Linda said, share the show. Again, for the sake of our messaging and helping us grow the mission that we are on in serving families and helping marriages, please rate our shows. Give us a 5-star rating. That is not for our ego. That is for the search engines, so that when people are having family and marital challenges and they punch something into a Google search, that we have a greater likelihood of having our message rise up to them. So please help us with those kinds of things.
So again, we want to thank Hummel Insurance Group and Casey's Outdoor Solutions for their support. And we thank you for listening to Rock Solid Radio, building a stronger community, one family at a time. Make it a great day.
Rock Solid Radio wants to thank Casey's Outdoor Solutions. Casey's is a premier garden center and gift shop located in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They offer a wide selection of high-quality plants, landscaping materials, and home decor. They do amazing high-quality work and can help you transform your indoor and outdoor living spaces into something beautiful. So stop by Casey's Outdoor Solutions today and let them know you appreciate their support for Rock Solid Radio. Visit Casey's today at 21481 State Line Road, Lawrenceburg, Indiana.